let me move on to rule of law a bit. As India becomes a global power, there's a need to have stronger institutions and a firm rule of law and its enforcement. The rule of law seems vital to enable a well functioning society. And following those laws mandatory whether we agree with them or not. Please explain to us the importance of rule of law in our society.
See, when we start with the rule of law, we say it's a rule of law versus rule of men. That's the meaning of rule of law. Rule of law means however high you are, the law is above you. The rule of law means your rights are recognized, delineated, and guaranteed. And rule of law means there is a robust, independent judiciary who protects your rights. All this we have. But rule of law has certain other elements too. Rule of law means you must have an honest executive. And when I say executive, I mean both the political executive and the civil service. We had almost reached a point in India where the phrase honest executive started sounding like an oxymoron. I think we have turned away from that, at least to some extent. And yet when we feel we have moved away and we have moved up, something like what is happening in Bombay happens, which shakes the foundations of rule of law. We have another element of rule of law is the enforcement of law. And if the commissioner of Bombay, which is India's prime financial capital, the commissioner of Bombay police is of the kind who we have just seen, and the home minister of one of India's prime states is of the kind we have just seen, God be with the rule of law. Rule of law also means a very insulated and sensitized criminal law jurisprudence. And I personally feel this trend, which started with Supreme Court hearing the telecom licensing case, where industrialist bashing became the fashion of the day, it suited the politicians to get the heat off themselves and turn it on to the business community, which has led to a very strange development in the law of bail, where today our whole justice system, criminal justice system, has become a system of trial by embarrassment. You're arrested where you need not be arrested, because there is an allegation, and especially in big cases, the allegation hits the small TV screen with people screaming about when will justice be done. So you have the lynch mob, you have the bloodletting crowds already to go, followed by arrest, followed by embarrassing leaks from the police, followed by incarceration, followed by refusal of bail. And we have zero accountability. In the UK, where they do not have a written constitution, the courts here have recognized that you can sue the police for false arrest. Believe me, if there was rule of law, the judges who in the telecom case oversaw the investigation and all the police officers who conducted that investigation and put people in jail, which has led to 100% acquittals, all of them should be made accountable. So this is where, if India is to really grow, today when people come to me in London to consult saying we are investing in India, I look at them and smile and say, you're very brave people. I know of a case where some Samsung dealer somewhere in Bihar made a complaint because his little franchise for running a Samsung store was terminated. He put the chairman of Samsung saying he has conspired with the local Indian staff to terminate my shop. And the criminal court issued a summons. The High Court quashed. The Supreme Court reversed and said, of course, he must come and answer. Now, if this is how you're going to administer the rule of law, it becomes just a weapon of oppression. So this is where we really need to fix our rule of law. Our criminal justice system has to be depoliticized. I mean, look at the treatment Arnab Goswami got. You may like his channel, you may not like his channel. See the treatment he got. They arrested him, they threw him in Taloja jail, and read Justice Chandrachud's judgment from the Supreme Court, saying if tomorrow you do not pay somebody because you have a dispute with him, you pay him part, you don't pay him part, and he has other creditors, and the creditors are beating his door down, and that person for some reason commits suicide, you have to be arrested. If that's the law, then how many of us are safe? And arrested and denied bail and put inside a jail. You read if Justice Chandrachud's judgment is worth reading. He says, how can you even call this an offense? So, this is where, and is there any doubt as to why he was arrested? There was no doubt. Now, if in 2021, the criminal justice system can be used like this, which businessman will be safe? And why would anybody want to really invest in India and open himself up to this kind of treatment? So this is where we need serious repair if we need to bring back rule of law. And finally, I must say, I don't want to talk too much about this, but the Vodafone, the Supreme Court decided in their favor. You brought a retrospective law. The finance minister said, we will let the international tribunal decide. You embarrassed yourself before an international tribunal, which gave certain very stern findings against India. You're not accepting that. You're challenging it in Singapore. Now you, the Republic of India, are asserting sovereignty by giving up your right to immunity and surrendering yourself to the jurisdiction of the Singapore court. If the Singapore court says something nasty about you, have you done yourself proud for how much? $2 billion, $3 billion of tax? And what is the message you're giving to the business community? So, these are certain things which have come, which have dented India's commitment in public perception, India's commitment to the rule of law, which needs to be fixed.
Thank you for your candid views for this. In fact, you have also referred in some of the TV interviews, Harish, about the difference between our rights as citizens and our duties as citizens, that rights are not absolute as some come to believe. Could you also elaborate on this?
See, we have rights and we have duties. Democracy is work in progress. And as everybody says, freedom survives as long as you have the twinkle in the eye of the common man. Freedom is the most fragile virtue. And according to me, the biggest threat to freedom comes from freedom. You have the right to criticize. You have the right to call the government. You have a right to express views which differ from the views of mainstream. But is there a boundary? Is there a boundary which says you will not question the territorial integrity of India? Or is it your right to say that the Indian army in Kashmir is an occupying army? Is that freedom of speech? Is it your right to say that we must not allow the Indian flag to fly on the Red Fort and we must wave the flag of a terrorist organization? Is that your right? Does freedom of speech extend to inviting people to anarchy and physical violence? If you have a right to protest, the average citizen of a city also has a right to go about his business. I do not agree that your right to protest includes the right to make life a living hell for others who are going about to earn their daily bread. So your duty as a citizen is to respect the rights of the others. You see, as they say, my right to stretch my arm ends at the tip of your nose. And that it is my duty to stop my arm from stretching the moment it reaches the tip of your nose. And this is the confluence of rights and duties of citizens. We must have certain things on which we agree. Do we agree to the idea of India, or you don't agree with the idea of India? If you agree to the idea of India, you may say this is not the way to govern India. You may disagree with certain measures taken by India. But certain offices have to be respected. It is your right to criticize judgments. It's your right to criticize the judiciary. But today what we see, I'm sorry to say this, today what we see is binaryism. A group of people are so intellectually convinced of their own infallibility that if they support a cause and that ends up in court, the judges can do one of the two things: either decide in their favor or be considered supine and spineless or dishonest. This binaryism, that either the judge is honest because he decides in my favor, a judge who doesn't decide in my favor is dishonest, either intellectually or pecuniarily or in all ways. Is that a right? And is that a part of freedom of speech? Or is it your duty to protect the institutions with whom you disagree? It's very easy to champion the cause of those with whom we agree. But with that, don't you have a corresponding duty to tolerate dissent? So this is the right and duty interplay, which I always consider has to be kept in mind.
Thank you, Harish. Let me now move on to something which is happening all around us, especially during the COVID period, because of we are all bound to home, online, Zoom calls as we are doing now. So technology is having an enormous and far-reaching impact on the lives of both ordinary people and the nation state. I mean, the law, when you studied it in the 70s, may not have all the cyber laws and whatever which are there now. There is a great deal of controversy over the role of Twitter and Facebook and other social media platforms and their desire to monetize personal data, biases, intrusion on privacy, and such matters. And I don't know whether laws have been able to keep pace with this environment, and whether they have become so large that they are not able to rein in their monopolistic tendencies, as was done in the past in the US for Standard Oil, AT&T, and all. I mean, Facebook, Alphabet, Apple, they are, and Twitter, they have become so large, and every time they are termed as monopolies or very, very competitive and aggressive, they just somehow get away with whatever they're doing. Do you think such corporates will be brought under control? Will there be laws for them to make them manageable? And to end it, of course, what about India?
You're absolutely right. The cyber explosion and the development of social media has presented the kind of challenges which lawyers of my generation, frankly, are perhaps even ill-equipped to deal with. We are all struggling, and it raises certain very far-reaching questions. Today, Twitter, Facebook, and other similar platforms have arrogated to themselves the right to censor what goes up. In America, censorship is considered per se unconstitutional because it is considered pre-speech restrictions. In India, we have recognized censorship of newspapers to a very narrow extent. Censorship was always considered what the government did. Nobody ever contemplated there would be a private player who would become such a public utility of such a magnitude that today I think the social media has become the primary carrier of news as compared to it's social media, then I think it's the electronic media, and then it is the other forms. And the social media has made every person with a point of view a publisher. So where do we draw the balance? The jury is still out on should companies like Facebook and WhatsApp be compelled to have a takedown policy in which they now become responsible for making sure objectionable content is removed. Or the other counterpoint is, how can you allow a private profit-driven agency to invade my right of free speech and shut me down? Now, this issue of principle has not yet been resolved. A very interesting case is going to come up very shortly. I can lead you on to it. The latest rules which have been published, for example, for tracing. Now, let's take this, the toolkit which was put up. Now, the police wants to know who was the first person who put it up. So they asked WhatsApp, can you tell us who's the originator of the message? So now they've amended the rules and said, you must give us the first originator. Now, WhatsApp is end-to-end encrypted. WhatsApp doesn't know who puts up which message where. And they don't store messages, they delete messages. If they compel WhatsApp to start reading messages, because the only way a company like WhatsApp can get to the original message and tell you, this is where it started, that means you're telling him to read the message. So it's like telling the postman, you must read every letter you deliver. So that if I ask you, you will tell me who was the first one to write that. Then what happens to my right to privacy? If they read every message, then my messages to my daughter would be read. Your messages to your daughter would be read, as much as a message to your wife, to your girlfriend, to your mother, to your father. Everything will have to be read to keep a record of that message. And then how do you prevent them from monetizing it? The information they derive from it. So these are such issues. But then on the other hand, the government says, if there's child pornography, if there are pedophiles, if there are terrorists who are using these, should we not have a right to get to them? Now, these are such important principles which have come into conflict. Writing the law is going to be the next step. I don't think we have as yet resolved which way to go, because you have on the one hand the Supreme Court upholding the right to privacy, and they struck down the private recourse to the Aadhaar card. The law has been amended. I'm sure that will be challenged. And on the other hand, you have telecom operators who say, I can give you the phone free if you give me your data. And a lot of people won't mind that. So these are such issues of principle. I think as a society, we have to come to certain conclusions of how far we want to take which principle. And then the laws will follow.
Okay, it'll take a while, I guess, and we'll wait to see how this thing unfolds. Let me ask you about your experience. you charge rupee 1 for this famous Kulbhushan Jadhav case in the International Court of Justice. And you've done us proud, Harish. I mean, we are all so proud of you. And the way you argued, and the Pakistani advocate there also was quite a piece of work. Could you share us your experience representing India at the princely sum of rupee 1 at the International Court of Justice?
Well, I'm going to start by telling you I have done so much work for the government of India, including appearing for CBI, for example, back in the day in the Upahar film fire case. And I made it a rule whenever I appear for the government, I charge rupee 1 because it avoids unnecessary controversy of how much fees is being paid. I burnt myself very hard initially, even before I'd ever appeared for government of India, because my father once called me in 93 when he was Minister of Steel Mines and said, "How many cases have you done for Steel Authority? I want details immediately." So I reached back and I found out. And I said, in the last 6 years, I've done 3 cases. Total fees received was 6,000 rupees. Because somebody had gone and complained to the Prime Minister that Mr. Salve, from the time he has become Minister of Steel and Mines, has been passing on works of all the PSUs to his son. So my father told me, "Promise me till I'm a minister, you will not accept any paid brief from any PSU." So from that date, I started appearing free whenever I learned my lesson. When it come to Kulbhushan Yadav, the case started very interestingly. In a TV debate, I must have said this should be taken to ICJ. It got picked up in the PMO. Somebody told Sushma ji that Mr. Salve is saying this, call him. So I was called and said, "Deliver now. You open your mouth, do something about it." So we researched the law. We found some way of taking it to the ICJ. The thing is, it had to be kept so confidential that it was dictated by me and one junior from my chambers on my desktop. And I used to disconnect my desktop from the internet when I used to work on this. Saved on pen drives. That pen drive used to go to the secretary in the ministry who'd make changes. And this is how we worked it. There was only one printed copy, which was printed in Sushma ji's house, which she read, made some changes. We took down the changes. She said, "Leave this copy for 1 day." She went and showed it to the Prime Minister, brought it back. That copy was destroyed and it was back on a pen drive. And the briefs were printed in Blackstone chambers, not even in India. So this is how we have to keep it secret. Then somebody said, "What fees will you charge?" I said, "I never charge a fee." They said, "No, we need law ministry's permission for your fees." And the moment they would have applied to the law ministry, the whole world would have known that India is going to the ICJ. I said, "Forget about the fees. rupee 1. I said, "For that, you don't need any permission." And it's a beautiful postscript. I spoke to Sushma ji at 8:45 at night. I was in Delhi and she told me, "When are you going to come and collect your fee?" And I said, "I'll come tomorrow and meet you." I put the phone down. 1 hour later, she was no more. And her daughter then presented me. She got a silver coin with 1 rupee made for me, and she gifted me that.
Let me ask you about public interest litigation, which has been hailed by many or some as the most dramatic democratizing move that the Indian judiciary has made post-independence India. On the other hand, according to a legal scholar, PIL was a tragedy to begin with, and over time it has become a dangerous farce. What is your take on PILs?
My take on PIL is, if you look at it, if you step back and look at PIL as an institution, it is not PIL, but it is the court itself. And what the court has done is it has redefined itself. The Supreme Court of India is no longer just a dispute resolution tribunal. It is an institution of governance. And that has hugely helped strengthen democracy in India. At times when, especially between 1991 onwards, and in between 2004 and 2014, when at times you felt there was no government. I mean, I remember my own comment on TV. Somebody said the Supreme Court is running India. I said, well, as citizen Salve, I said, thank God somebody is. So to some extent, the judiciary, by becoming an institution of governance, has demonstrated to the Indian people that there is yet another institution which can take up complicated cases and deal with them objectively and transparently. So I think that has hugely strengthened Indian democracy. Now, any such evolution is, I used this earlier in the day, Lord Sumption used a very nice expression in a speech about development of law in these areas. He says it is always crab-like. It's one step forward, one step to the left, one step to the right, half a step to the back, and then yet another step forward. It never moves in a linear pattern. It's always, and that's because you feel your way through. So there have been judgments which have been way over the top. But if you stand back and look at it today, do you not, as a citizen, feel confident that if something goes horribly wrong, like what we saw in Bombay going horribly wrong? And is there any doubt in an Indian's mind that this had to be investigated by an outside agency? It could not be the police itself, which was in the cauldron. And the court stepped in and ordered that. Now, at least as a citizen, we feel, well, if a thing like this reaches the court, it comes into public domain, it is dealt with transparently in an open room. And there is some hope that it will be resolved with principles consistent with rule of law. So I think this has been a very positive move. Yes, it has had its aberrations. And it has found the court has an identity today. And that identity is very important for the court and for Indian democracy. You're on mute.
Coming to Goa now, just to change track because we're running out of time now. We always like to end with Goa. Recently Justice Bobde was in Goa, and he hailed our uniform civil code, and he said, "This is what the framers of our constitution envisaged for India." He said, quote, "I've had the privilege of administering justice under that code. It applies in marriage and succession, governing all Goans, irrespective of religious affiliation," unquote. What are your views on uniform civil code, and do you see it being implemented in the rest of India?
The Goan code, and we've always, I don't know too much about it, but I have some idea of how it has worked. And I think it's worked beautifully in Goa. And I think, I don't mean to be patronizing, I hope I don't come across that way, but I think Goa could be a great model for India of how diversity can be preserved and how diversity can blossom. Goa has evolved, but Goa is still Goa. It hasn't lost its identity. I've been in Delhi from 1976 till 2014, when I almost shifted out. In the last 4 or 5 years, I've hardly been in Delhi. I think Delhi is a city which has lost its identity. If we can go back into celebrating our diversities and have, for our purposes, codes which conform to our diversity of our region, rather than have a slam dunk law across India. It could be something which we could do. And I think today, to some extent, the intolerance you see in society is coming because we have lost celebrating diversity. If the rest of India could develop the same temper as Goa, I think India would be a much better place.
You're always kind to Goa. Thank you so much, Harish. I have a couple of questions from the audience. So would you like to just take one of them. And one question is, what are your comments from Raghav Khanna? So we would like to hear your comments on reservations in India.
I have always been a critic of reservations in India. And my one-liner argument is, our constitution was put in place in 1950. We are in 2021. 61 years down the road. If reservations have worked, they should have achieved their purpose and they should be removed. And if in 60 years they haven't worked, they are obviously a failure and should be removed. So I don't think you see, reservations made sense when government jobs gave you status. In the British days, people used to hanker for a company job because that took you out of your caste system. It gave you access to the British justice system, which gave you more access to the system, which gave you fair justice, which you would be denied if you belong to a lower class. So it gave you an identity. It gave you status. A job was not for money, a job gave you status. A sarkari naukri was your way to escape from your caste. Today, this has become an economic measure, and it's become a completely politicized measure. So I personally feel that the principle of reservation, which I have always considered, is a digression from the principle of equality, should be revisited in an objective debate. Whether the time for that debate is right or not is a political question which I don't answer.
So to end our whole webinar, I would like to ask you, Harish, what are your 5 personal mantras for life? You know, this is for all our young generation. I mean, we have 2 big law colleges in Goa. Of course, there are many others also watching you eagerly. What are your 5 personal? How do you become a Harish Salve? What are your 5 personal mantras?
Well, first of all, why would anybody want to become a Harish Salve? So I parked that issue. Let's assume somebody does want to embark on that misadventure. Well, if you want to be a lawyer, first of all, whatever work you do, when you choose your vocation, it should be something which you can pursue with a passion. The second is that never kill that little child in you. You must always have some mischief up your sleeve. And that is what gives you a lot of energy in life. The third is, and I've realized that whatever you pursue, always remember health is 9 points in life. I don't, as you know, I don't preach any virtues of abstinence, but good health is important. Fourth is one must always have an open mind, open to new ideas, and always challenge your beliefs. And always recognize that you may have, however strong a point of view you may have, there may be space for a divergent or a contrary point of view. If you keep that open and you keep challenging yourself, you grow your mind. And lastly, always be open to criticism. Criticize and be criticized. You must criticize yourself. As Mr. Palkewala told me, you must be your own most trenchant critic. When you come out of a courtroom, don't think whether you won or lost the case. Ask yourself, could anybody else have argued it better? If the answer is yes, you have a margin for improvement. If the answer is no, if you've lost the case, doesn't matter. Go home, have a drink, and everything will be fine. So always accept criticism and be your own most trenchant critic. These are the mantras, I think, of success.
That was brilliant, Harish. As always, it's always a scintillating evening with you. You are really a true gem, and your breadth and depth of knowledge and clarity today has, of course, always leaves me astounded. And of course, all the registrants, I'm sure, are inspired and educated. Thank you, Harish, for the gift of your time, especially on this weekend.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And for leaving us with much to think about. Thank you again for the honor and privilege, and have a great weekend and a great evening. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
God bless.